Okay, we're gonna get started, and then if anyone else comes in, that's great. So thank you both for being here and joining us today for Inspiring a Passion for Science and Nature with eBird Explorers Youth Action for Birds with Kelly Schaefer. Please feel free to say hi in the chat before we get started as well, and let us know where you're from. Thank you for attending a webinar with New York State Network for Youth Success. At the network, we work to increase access to high quality after school, summer, and other expanded learning opportunities. We are one of 50 state after school networks working in conjunction with the National After School Alliance to improve systems of support for after school programs. We are the state lead for the National After School Association, working to improve both program and job quality for professionals in the after-school workforce. And we are the state lead for the National Girls Collaborative Project, working to increase equity in STEAM programming. Our goal for hosting the STEAM Skills webinars is to showcase the quality STEAM curriculum and resources being conducted in New York State, share these resources with New York State educators and others of the community, and to connect educators and STEAM professionals with each other to enhance the STEAM community in New York. Thank you again for joining us today. And if you have any suggestions for other topics that you want to see, you can let us know in the survey that I'll share at the end too. So we will now get started with today's webinar, and I'm going to pass it over to presenter Kelly.
Hi, folks. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are a small group, so I want to just encourage you, if you have anything to ask or add as we go along, please feel free to do so. I'm cool if you want to unmute, but the meeting is being recorded, so if you prefer, please feel free to use the chat option. I will suggest that if you don't have it already, that you download the Merlin Bird ID app if you have room on your phone. There is a section during part of the webinar where we're going to practice using it, and also where you'll have an opportunity to try to find some cool information for your area on it. It is a two-part download, so once you download the app, you'll want to open it and then install your bird pack. There should be a local one for just like New York State area, which will take up less room on your phone. If you're a bird nerd like me, you might choose to put in the whole US. Totally up to you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on our today's webinar, where we'll be exploring our latest out of school time leaders guide, eBird Explorers Youth Action for Birds. And I'm coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds and nature. And I'm with the K-12 education team. There are 3 of us currently, and we create innovative resources and deliver transformative trainings that empower educators to build young people's science skills through nature, participatory science, and inquiry. And today we're really going to be focusing on this nature connection and participatory science piece. These are our 3 pillars. These are what all of our resources and trainings touch on, one or more of these pillars: nature connection, participatory science, and inquiry investigations. So we really focus on packaging all this really cool stuff that the lab is putting out and making it available to educators to help build their kids' connections to nature, birds, and science. So what we really hope to achieve is helping kids start to view themselves as scientists. Because if you ask most youth to draw a scientist, you're going to get a drawing kind of like this. So a guy in a lab coat with some beakers and some equations. Sometimes there's crazy Einstein hair. This guy has a really excellent mustache. And this is science, right? It's just kind of a narrow conception of science. We want folks to broaden their understanding of what science is and start to view these people as scientists too. people who are outside asking questions about our natural world, following scientific protocols to find the answers. And then all the way to this, to viewing themselves as scientists because they are doing the work that scientists do, collecting data and observing the natural world. So in today's session, my goals are to get you comfortable with the Youth Action for Birds Leader Guide, explore the lessons a little bit, and kind of get into the understanding of why we put things in the order we did and what we hope to achieve, as well as really get into the meat of what participatory science is and the eBird Participatory Science Project, as well as explore the Merlin Bird ID app. And as we go along, we're going to kind of mimic going through a few of the activities as well as online we can. So eBird Explorers Youth Action for Birds is actually part of a long history of cooperation between our program and New York State 4-H and New York State Network for Youth Success. So just to give you an idea, we started working with New York State 4-H in 2013, and we were working with two different lesson guides. One was Nature Detectives, which is designed more for non-formal education, and then Habitat Connections, which was designed more for formal education, but was pretty adaptable. But coming through to this time period 2020 to 2024 engaging youth with eBird program, we really wanted to actually design a lesson guide that was created in conjunction with our partners. So typically we had been adapting things for our partners in 4-H and after school, and we really wanted to do something together this time. So the idea was that we brought together folks from New York State 4-H as well as the New York State Network for Youth Success to partner with us to make an out-of-school time version of our eBird Explorers curriculum suite. So we have versions of a similar curriculum with similar goals for K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12 in a classroom setting where we were really tightly aligned with NGSS and Common Core standards and was really designed with a classroom setting in mind. And we wanted to create something that was designed with the out of school setting in mind. So we worked with these partners to help us do that. And then we evaluated the curriculum at 6 sites and worked on some design, translation, and distribution to wrap up the program. So this is part of our distribution. So really glad that you are here with us to learn about this lesson guide, and I hope that you will find it useful. So the eBird Explorers Youth Action for Birds is 11 lessons about an hour long. So one of the things we heard from our partners was that an hour-long lesson was usually the most adaptable, but they usually are in chunks of 2 or 3 activities. So if you need more or less time, you should be able to adapt these lessons to your setting. They have indoor and outdoor components. So we wanted to get youth outside as much as possible, but also wanted to ground some of the learning in indoor activities as well. There are some technology needs along with this lesson guide, including access to the internet to do some research, as well as the ability to share a few slides. We tried to keep the slides fairly minimal, but just with the way eBird works and with the amazing visuals that comes out of eBird, having some access to technology is pretty important here. Also, we do have mobile apps written into the lesson guide, but there are workarounds for that if that's something that you aren't able to utilize in your space. And if that is an issue for you or something you'd like to hear more about as we go through, let me know in the chat window and we can talk about adaptations. And there are some leader tips within the lesson guide themselves, which will help talk about those as well. But in conjunction with our partners, we came up with 3 main goals for this leader's guide. which was creating opportunities for positive youth development, creating opportunities for youth to view themselves as scientists, and then building nature connection and connection to birds. So you will see that throughout these lessons as we go over them. So here are the lessons laid out by title, and I wanted to just kind of show you where we hit these three main goals. I would say there's a lot of overlap, probably not even more than I've pictured here. But we tried to build in positive youth development practices throughout. And then we really do hit the science part in a few specific lessons. Youth are building towards this, and participating in eBird is a science project. So youth are building towards this as they're building their bird ID skills, even though it might not be explicitly highlighted in the lessons, but I just shared here the ones where we explicitly highlight it. And then this nature connection and birds piece comes in once we start building our observation skills. Oh, and each lesson, I should say, begins with a welcome and connection piece. So some suggestions on a relevant discussion topic that you can have when you first come together as a group to just kind of have that community building piece before you jump right into the activities. So lesson one starts out with this idea of who are scientists and gets at the idea that everybody has scientific skills and that these are skills that you can build and practice, and that you can practice them through participatory science. So we do the draw scientist activity, which I showed you an example of a student drawing at the beginning. And then we do a meet a scientist activity. So for this lesson, we have put together, I believe it is 12 write-ups of diverse scientists who work in environmental fields. So we did focus specifically on nature-based or environmental-based science here. And these are real scientist profiles with facts about them and about the work they did and what inspires them and how they do their work. So if your students haven't been exposed to scientists a ton, these are really great introductions, and we tried to feature a really diverse group of people. And then the last thing that this lesson does is introduce the concept of participatory science. So we've talked about that a lot already. I've said that phrase how many times already as we go along, but I wanted to pause here and take a moment and ourselves learn about what participatory science is. So I would love to throw this question out to you. Please feel free to use the chat window to share your thoughts. Have you heard the term participatory science? You might have also heard community science or citizen science. If you have, what are some key words or definitions that come to mind, or any projects that you have heard of? Saying they haven't heard much, but think of collaboration. Yes, that is uh, a great word to get at the heart of what participatory science is. It really is collaborative. Anything else pop to mind for other people? Shared goals and interests? Absolutely. I like this image when I think about participatory science because you see these puzzle pieces coming together. Saying that they have heard of participatory science, brought up the collaboration piece, and then asking a lot of people to do some smaller things to help with science. I love that. Yeah. So we're getting at these puzzle pieces coming together, right? So participatory science is a type of science where regular folks like you, me, and our youth participants who aren't professional scientists go out collect data of the natural world, share our observations with databases that scientists are then using to answer real-world questions. So the observations that you make and the data that you share are going to places that professional scientists are using to help us better understand our world and put the puzzle pieces together. When I think of participatory science, I love this image because it really does get at just the breadth of projects that are out there. So there are projects from the scale of the stars and helping identify stars in images all the way to the scale of the microscopic, from totally online to totally outside, from totally global projects to super local projects and everything in between. So there are a variety of participatory science projects out there on a variety of subjects. And if birds aren't your thing, which I don't know why they wouldn't be, but then I am pretty biased, there are projects out there for you. So if your kids are into insects or plants or stars or weather, there are participatory science projects out there that you can find and use to engage them in doing real scientific protocols and contributing to real scientific databases. And here at the Lab of Ornithology, we really do view these projects as partnerships between volunteers and our professional scientists, because without our partners, we wouldn't be able to get this amazing wealth of data that helps us answer real world questions. And so as part of that partnership, we make all of the data that are collected in our projects available to you as well. So you can go through the database, which I'll give you an idea of what that's like as we go along. So I just wanted to share these two participatory science resources for you because you might decide that, yeah, you are into participatory science, but you're not, eBird isn't going to be the project that you use. Totally fine. SciStarter.org is a fantastic place to go to look up projects. You can look them up by subject, by the age of the youth you're working with, by whether you want it to be inside or outside, by your location. So that is a fantastic place to go to look up projects that you might be interested in participating in, excuse me. And then participatory-sciences.org is the advancing the participatory science organization that kind of is at the cutting edge of these projects and is a great place to go to just to get a better sense of where the field is at large. So two great resources that you can check out. All right, anytime I talk about participatory science, I have to share this image. And I just want to throw this out to you again. When you see this image, what comes to mind that you might be looking at? Looks a lot like a light pollution map, doesn't it? Yeah, you can see where there's more population, there's more lights. Well, in some cases. Yeah, so what if I reframed my question and I said, in the context of participatory science, what do you think this map might represent? It's saying data points. Absolutely. Yes. So every point of light on this map is a submission to the eBird database. There's not really an underlying continental map here. The fact that you can see the shape of our world this well means there's that many people out there who are collecting observations of birds and sharing their sightings with us through eBird. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like by the numbers, we are talking more than 1.7 billion observations submitted across more than 135 million checklists by more than 1 million participants, recording 10,954 species of birds, which is more than 98% of all the bird species in the entire world. So if you think about what it would take a scientist or a group of scientists to recreate a data set like this on their own, they couldn't. It's not possible. Data like this is only possible with participatory science because participatory science is people-powered science. And the more I look at this map, the more inspiring I find it and the more cool I find it. Like you can find all of these amazing things happening. Like look at all these little shipping lines or cruise lines going out to the tip of Antarctica. So there is just this amazing coverage of our world because people care about birds and they're sharing their observations. Although there is a bit of a lack of data in Siberia if anybody wants to take a trip and do some birding for us. So what I love about participatory science as an educator is it really helps us meet our learning goals while providing our youth an opportunity to engage in something that's exciting and real world and provides them the opportunity to connect to their local habitats and study their local wildlife. And it can spark a lifelong curiosity and connection to birds. For us as educators, it's also a relatively low-cost year-round activity. And we know that we are helping our students answer the essential question of why are we doing this? Because their data really matters. We know that their data is going somewhere that scientists are using, and that can be super motivating for youth. So along with this lesson in activity 3, we play a video that helps explain what participatory science is. This uses the term citizen science at the moment, but we are going to be updating this video. We're actually in the process of updating it to use the participatory science language. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that this video still uses citizen science. This was a former term for this type of project, and there was kind of a collective reckoning along the group that recognized that the term citizen can be pretty fraught for some folks, and we wanted it to be a very welcoming sense. So we've changed the title to participatory science. And until we get that video updated and I update the lesson plans, there is a note in the lessons about having that conversation with your youth. Like, why might we change the title from citizen science to participatory science? It can be a really cool opportunity to have a discussion. I won't play the video now just because I want to make sure we have enough time to get to questions and everything later on. So just wanted to give you a heads up there. So let's get into what it takes to participate in these sorts of projects. So all of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's participatory science projects follow a similar pathway. First, getting outside, identifying and observing birds. Second, collecting data, then entering that data online and retrieving and viewing that online data. So as I mentioned, here at the lab, we view it as a partnership, and you have the opportunity to retrieve and play in the data that those 1.7 billion observations you have equal access to. So eBird's motto is that every bird counts. So eBird is not limited by time of year or location. Any bird, anytime, anywhere we want to know about in the eBird database. Because one of our mottos at the lab is that we want to keep common birds common, because it's a lot easier to protect birds at a healthy population point than it is to bring them back from the brink. So we want to know about the starlings and the house sparrows and the robins. We want to know about all those birds, even if they're terribly common, not terribly common, wonderfully common. So yes, any bird, anytime, anywhere. And eBird is a really fantastic project, and its origins are pretty cool, but I'm gonna let the eBird team tell you about that. And if the sound doesn't work, please flag me in the chat window.
Every day, millions of people around the world enjoy watching birds and recording their sightings. What if there were a way to take all of these observations, yours, ours, everyone's, and put them all in one place?
If we could do this, we would fundamentally transform not just birding, but science and conservation.
From this idea emerged eBird. Put simply, eBird is a way for anyone around the world to store their birding observations, their photos, their sound recordings, and make them available to educators, scientists, and birders. It's incredibly easy to use, and it's incredibly powerful. All you do is let us know where you went birding, when you traveled, and what you saw. It's powerful because hundreds of thousands of people all around the world are doing it, and it's growing. eBird already safeguards 500 million sightings, information that allows all of us to understand the movements and needs of birds at global scales. eBird maintains your lists for you and shares them with other birders from around the world. By sharing, it's now possible for anyone, anywhere, to find your target birds and the best birding hotspots any time of the year. Before eBird, there was no way to comprehensively understand population-level movements of many species. By combining your sightings with remote-sensed habitat data from NASA, we're able to generate species distribution models that provide an unparalleled view of where and when birds are in the landscape. Scientists and students all over the world are now able to use eBird datasets for their research at a variety of spatial scales. These observations help inform better conservation strategies, opening the door to the future of bird conservation. And this is just the beginning. With the help of millions of people who come to eBird each year, we are creating a free, open access system that is easy to use, fun, and rewarding. Rewarding for birders, for scientists, for conservationists, and ultimately the birds themselves. Go to eBird.org or download eBird Mobile to get started, all for free. By joining eBird, you're joining a global team of people that share your passion for birds. Be a part of it.
So I don't know if you caught it in this video, but Ian says that eBird safeguards 500 million bird observations. This video was filmed in 2017. So in just, less than 10 years, we've increased to 1.7 billion observations. So eBird really is a very quickly growing database, which is really exciting for the implications for us as folks who care about birds, and the level of information and understanding we now have because of these amazing participatory science folks helping us get this data. So to summarize how you participate, there are two ways. You can keep a paper checklist and then submit your observations online through the database. And we do, as part of the lessons, have a paper checklist that you can print out and use. So if you don't want to use the smart devices while you're outside for the app for this, totally get it. And there's easy workarounds, and then you can come together and submit your list as a class through a computer. The other way would be the app, which keeps track of some things that you need to know, like how long you were outside and the distance, which can make things fairly easy. One thing I will say is if you have youth out birding together, and you have a couple folks keeping track on their phones, you're going to still want to come together and create one list and only submit from one device, because you don't want to have multiple lists with the same birds, the same birding outing. So yeah, to submit to eBird, you need to know the date you were out there, what type of count you were doing. So was it a stationary, watching a bird feeder from one location? Was it traveling, walking around your neighborhood? That sort of thing. How long you were out there, how far you traveled, and how many people you were with. And that gets at this effort piece, which is something that we're using to standardize the sightings and the quality of the sightings. in the background. So I don't know what the algorithm is. People a lot smarter than me made it, but it helps us standardize for effort among different birders. And then once you share that information, we just need to know what you saw or heard. As many of you probably know, birds have unique calls to their species, so you can identify them by sound or by sight, and both are equally good for eBird. And then when you share that, the last important thing to know is that we'll ask you this question down here, which is, are you submitting a complete checklist of the birds you were able to identify, yes or no? If you say yes, that allows us to use your list for presence and absence data, which is important for some of these analyses we do that let us create models of where the birds are. If you say no, that's fine. We just won't use it for some of those sightings. And so the difference between yes and no in this case would be the best of your ability, right? So if you're out there and you're birding and you saw a bird fly by, but you in your youth, you just didn't get a good enough look, you have no idea what it was, you can still submit a complete checklist, right? Because this is what you're able to identify to the best of your ability. When you would say no is if, like, you know, there were a bunch of ducks on a pond and you just did not have the time or energy to look at them. So then you would say, I'm not submitting a complete checklist. So just remember that to the best of your ability piece is important here for us as we're birding with youth. Sometimes I'll be birding with youth and like I will know that there were other birds around, but I won't necessarily be able to cue into what they were because I'm focused on our youth. And I might, on my own personal list, if I share the list with myself, add in those birds, but for the youth, it's still a complete checklist. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat window. If you have any questions about how to use eBird or how eBird uses its data, I can't recommend the eBird Essentials course enough. This is a free online course. It's about 2.5 to 3 hours to complete. And we do recommend that you go through it before using these lessons because we don't go into depth in how to use eBird in the lessons because the resource already exists for you. And it will help you if you're worried about data quality, if you're worried, well, what if my data I'm submitting with the youth isn't good enough? This will help you understand how eBird protects against or protects for that and helps you make sure you're submitting quality data. There's a ton of protections in eBird and backup for you. eBird has expert reviewers that if a checklist get flagged as something weird, say you're in New York and you put, I saw a flamingo, somebody is going to get flagged for that and they'll send you an email and be like, hey, can you tell me more about this flamingo sighting? It's really unusual for New York. And if indeed you saw a flamingo because it got pushed up by a hurricane or something, you could explain your sighting to them. And if you have pictures, all the better. But the emails you get are meant to just be friendly. Are you sure this is what you saw? If it is, can you tell me more about it? I get those emails sometimes and I'm a pretty decent birder. So, and sometimes I have to sit there and be like, am I sure I saw what I saw? So if that happens, it means you're seeing interesting things. So don't think it's a bad thing. And I would say after, gosh, 10 years or more of using eBird, I've probably gotten 4 emails. So it's not something that happens often. And I wanted to share a quick note about group accounts. eBird is not COPA compliant, so you need to be 13 or older to have an account. If you are working with youth that are younger than that, the way we suggest you do this is by creating a group account. And the lab is a single sign-on. So if you have your own account for eBird, you want to create something different for your youth because your eBird account gives you access to everything on the lab's website if you wanted to do other projects and you might not want to share that. So we just recommend you create a unique email to use with your students. And then when you create your eBird account, make sure you're using a password that you don't mind sharing with your students if you want them to log into the app and track their list that way. Another important note is to make sure that you share the checklist you create to a personal account or that you check the email of the group account regularly in case eBird does have any questions about your sightings. So that is our rundown of participatory science and what eBird is. Obviously, in the lesson for youth, it's not quite as in-depth as we just went. but I wanted to give you a solid background in eBird. The second lesson is about building observation skills. So in lesson 1, we had our introduction into who scientists are. We had our scientist profiles that we read, and then we got to learn about what participatory science is. In lesson 2, we start building up these skills that you'll need to be a good participatory scientist. So we build this foundational skill of observation through some fun activities. But first, we do a scientific skills brainstorm. So I do want to throw the question out to you. What skills or practices do you think make a good scientist? One of the things when you do this with youth is you'll often find that they will come up with observation on their own, being observant, which is a fun way to transition into the activities that follow. Asking questions, yes, being curious. What a fantastic scientist skill to have. That's a great one. What I like about asking this question, and if you have the opportunity to come back to these ideas later on, so if you can get your kids rolling and thinking of some good skills, you can come back to these ideas later. Listening skills, patience, absolutely. Being okay with not knowing right away. What a fantastic concept. Absolutely. One of the things we love to think about is you don't need to be an expert birder to teach birds with your kids, because you get to model learning along with them. And along with that is this idea of, I don't know right away. Let's find out. Let's try and figure out how we can find the answer. So yeah, these are all fantastic scientist skills. And then as part of this activity, as kind of the wrap up, we ask youth to reflect on, which of these skills do you already have? Where have you used them in your life recently? And then getting them to realize that these are skills they already have, and they can just practice them to use them in a scientific setting, let's say. So one of the things we really hope youth come away from these activities with is they already have so many of these skills. It's just about, using them in a new way and focusing them and practicing them. So the next group of lessons, we get into the bird ID skills, because you might all be like, yeah, eBird sounds great, but obviously I need to be able to identify birds to participate in eBird. How do I do that? So we have these lessons here to help you build those foundational ID skills with your youth. So through videos, apps, and a bunch of hands-on activities, we have youth really build their bird ID skills. And so some of these activities we'll kind of get an overview of as we go through. But a key factor in this is the Merlin Bird ID app. Has anybody heard of Merlin or used Merlin before? Feel free to share in the chat window if you have. If you haven't, you're in for a treat, I think. You'll really enjoy it. So there are 4 main ways to use Merlin. There's the step-by-step ID, there's sound ID, photo ID, and then the explore button. And I'm actually gonna take a moment to exit our PowerPoint here, because I'm going to try to actually model using eBird with you. So we're going to try to get my phone screen to share, and you're not allowed to judge me for any notifications that pop up while we do this. Okay, let's exit out of PowerPoint. And let's see if we can get my phone screen working. Are you seeing my phone screen? Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna, where can I see it that you can see our bird too? So I'm gonna open up the Merlin Bird ID app. This is the app here. And now you should be able to see if I can just make it a little smaller. There we go. And we'll put it right there. Now you should be able to see the app and the bird behind here. And we're gonna try out the step-by-step ID function. If If you haven't used this part of it before, this is a really fantastic part for youth to use. So if you click on step by step, it's going to ask you 5 questions, 2 of which your phone already knows, which is the location and the date. If you have Merlin and you downloaded it while we were practicing or as we've been going, please feel free to play along here. And I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to say today's location. I'm in Ithaca, New York. I'm going to say today's date. And the next is going to get at the size of the bird on a scale of birds that are pretty common. So we've got sparrow, robin, crow, and goose, and then you can pick between those as well. And we're going to be trying to identify this bird on the screen here, and it's a little challenging to guess size because, you know, the picture doesn't have a lot to go on, but I see that they're sitting on a barbed wire fence. So that gives me some idea of scale. So I'm going to say about robin sized. One thing I will note is if you do go through these steps and you don't see your bird, size is often where you might get tripped up. So try choosing a different size if the next steps don't turn up your bird. Size is probably the hardest thing to identify in the field just because scale can be difficult to judge. From here, we're going to pick up to 3 main colors that we see. So I'm going to choose brown. I see kind of overall a buffy color. And then I'm only going to choose 2 colors. And then I'm going to choose black because I see these black polka dots on the wing. And then I'm going to hit next. So the first question gets out size and shape, which is the first major clue to bird ID. The second one starts to get at color pattern, which is the second major clue to bird ID. And then this question starts to get at the next 2 major clues, which is habitat and behavior. So our options are eating at a feeder, swimming or wading, on the ground, in trees or bushes, on a fence or wire. And we've got our bird on a fence or wire. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next and see what options we come up with. So now is where we have a list of a short list of birds that should match our choices for this location and date. And these are based on essentially what we know is around through eBird. So eBird and participatory science data helps inform these choices. So we've got an American robin, and we're going to look for about 3 points of agreement between our example bird and the Merlin choices. So we've got a red-winged blackbird. I see overall black. That doesn't seem right. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So we'll pause here. We've got an overall tan buffy color. We've got spots on the wing, and then we've got these pink feet here too. And it's a little hard to see in this picture, but we should be able to see some other pictures too if you scroll through. And this gives you a sense of the beak shape. Beak shape is a great thing to pay attention to in bird ID, and this looks pretty good to me. And another thing that sticks out is that pointy tail. So I would say, yeah, this is our bird, the mourning dove. And I once heard these birds described as ice cream cone birds. So their body looks like an ice cream cone, and their head like a little cherry on top. And now every time I see them, I'm like, oh, what's the ice cream cone bird? So one of the things you could do is go hit info and learn more about your bird. So there's some descriptions. You can listen to the song. Let's see if it'll play loud enough. You can kind of get a sense for why it might be called a mourning dove if you could hear that call. It sounds a little bit like they're crying. And then you can see their range. And then if that is correct, you would hit this is my bird. I'm not going to hit that because I didn't actually see this bird today. But that helps Merlin learn what choices you chose to get to this bird because Merlin is ever evolving. All right, so that is the step-by-step ID. And I'm going to go ahead and X out of this and get back to our main one. So the other thing I want to share with you is the sound ID function. So I'm going to go ahead and hit sound ID and it's going to immediately start recording. So you'll see my voice start popping up as a spectrogram. So a spectrogram is a visual representation of sound. And so when I play a bird song in a moment here, what I want you to look for is if it recognizes a bird, the name will pop up right here. If it's hearing something it thinks is a bird, there will be a little blue dot right under the spectrogram. And then if it hears the bird that it's identified again, the name will light up in yellow. So if you're hearing different birds, it will help you understand which bird is which because it will light up when it hears the bird that it's identified. So let's go ahead and see if we can get a good sound going here. All right. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording, but hopefully you saw that little blue dot appear when it heard it, and then it picked up the white-breasted nuthatch and an American crow right at the end there. So one of the things I will recommend is sometimes Merlin Sound ID is pretty good, but sometimes it's going to come up with a weird option. I always recommend that you go here and you play the sound. And you see if it matches what you heard. So just confirm in that way. The best way to confirm is if you can get your eyes on it, but that can't always happen. So you can use the sound recordings to help confirm that as well. And then American Crow, we heard that right at the end. And if you click on it, it should take you to where it heard the crow. But you can also then again play the crow to confirm that that's what you heard. So that is how Merlin Sound ID works in a nutshell. Really fantastic tool to use. I'm actually going to go back to my sound recordings here. And what's cool is you can review all your sound recordings. And I'm actually going to, oh good, it didn't keep that one. I just didn't want to save that one because it was a recording of a recording. Awesome. And then the other functions you might use are photo ID. It's hard to get a picture of a bird, but this one is a favorite. So this is a really good one for us as educators to know about is this Explore tab here. So usually when you have Merlin open, it'll just be showing all of the birds that you have in your pack, and it basically functions like a field guide for birds. And if you saw something that was a hawk, you can like jump to that and scroll through all of them. But if you're like me and you have the entire US pack on here, that's a lot of birds to look through. So what I actually recommend doing is going here and switching to likely birds. So just real quick again, you go to the Explore tab, you go to this slider in the corner, and then you go likely birds. And I like to go most likely, not by family. And then you can choose to do that for today. So show 175 birds. And then here are the birds that I could expect to see if I stepped out the door today, which is really cool. But what's really amazing for us as educators is, say I know I want to do these lessons in spring of next year, I can choose a specific date. So I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to say May. Let's say May 1st. I want to know what birds I might be expected to see. And you can see the number has now jumped to 231 because that's migration season. So there are new birds coming in. And I can hit show birds. And now the list has updated. We had a blue jay first. Now we have American robin first. And what's cool about this is you could use this to create a list of 10 or 15 birds that you want your youth to know for that time period. So you can plan ahead for the birds you want your youth to learn. Yeah, the seasonality part is one of my favorite things about Merlin for us as educators. I just think it's so cool. It helps us prepare. So that is Merlin in a nutshell. And I'm going to go ahead and switch us back to our slides now. Please feel free to let me know if you have any questions in the chat window. There we go. So I'm going to just jump through these because we did this already. Okay. So the third lesson gets into getting to know birds better. So Merlin, I just did an intro for us because I want you to have Merlin in the back of your head as we go through those lessons. It gets introduced to students in a slightly different way than we've done it here. But first we try and get a sense for what our students know about birds already, and then we do a true or false that helps us dispel some myths about birds. Then we meet our 4 common birds, which are our Merlin size scale birds, which are common across the country, but also help prepare you to use Merlin if you get to know them pretty well. And then we start getting into going outside and spotting some local birds. So let's go ahead and do this true and false activity, see if we have some bird myths to dispel as well. We'll just go through a couple of them. So first, birds are the only living animals that have feathers. Do you think that is true or false? One is true. Feathers are one of the unique features of birds. So other animals besides birds can fly, but birds are the only creatures with feathers. Well, the only living creatures with feathers. There's lots of evidence now that dinosaurs had feathers, which is pretty cool. All right, let's look at number 2. All birds fly. Do you think that one is true or false? See lots of falses popping in. Can anybody provide an example? What are you thinking of to support your answer? Emus, penguins, absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of cool flightless birds out there. So one of the things I like to do with this activity is we'll set up different sides of the room. So one side is true and one side is false. And you have your students physically move from one side to the other. And then we'll do what we just did. Have somebody share their reasoning for why they chose their location. So say somebody says emus, they don't fly. I know they don't fly. And somebody says penguins. Well, if you would then give the students who chose true the opportunity to either stay with their answer or change. So you're practicing this idea of using evidence and also changing your mind based on evidence. So then we would go through the rest of these questions following a similar way. We're maybe a little behind on time, so I won't do them all, but you can get a sense for how you could see the opportunity to get to know what your students know about birds through these questions, but also practicing that mindset of, hey, it's okay to change your mind based on evidence too. The next thing that we do is start to get into these clues for identifying birds. And I mentioned them as we went through Merlin. One of the main clues is size and shape. And so we get into that, and then we get into making the local bird bingo card. I was going to have you practice using that explore function to find your 9 birds, but that we don't need to do that. But this is something I recommend doing is, think about what time of year you might do this, practice getting your most likely birds there, and then what would your 9 bingo birds be? And so the challenge then becomes, or the fun part then becomes, having your kids design their own bingo card. So you get that list of 9 birds that's likely for them to see. And then allow them to arrange them on their card and draw them themselves. And so they get to really kind of cue into some of those field marks, which are the things that you would look for to identify them when you see them outside. So in lesson 5, we continue to build on our bird ID skills. We get to actually go outside and play with our bird bingo card. And we also dive into the idea of participatory science again, but now we're looking at it from the standpoint of why. Why is participatory science important? So there is an article here that we encourage you to have your youth read, and it gets into how participatory science has actually been used in conservation. So you get to see that this is actually data that people are using and why it can be so important. In lesson 6, we continue building on our important clues to bird ID, the next being color pattern, with a game called Red Plover, which is based on kind of Red Rover. It's a similar game, and you have youth color in a, a bird's body shape with different colors, and you kind of use those to help them have them move across the room. It's a fun little game. And then we get into this idea of field marks, which are, you can see highlighted here on this drawing of a house sparrow. So that black chin and bib, that white wing bar, and the overall brown body, those would all be considered field marks, or things you would look for in the field to identify this bird. Then we get into building on those body part and field mark skills by each youth getting assigned a focus bird. And you could do this in a couple of ways. If you have a large group, you could have a couple people assigned to a bird. Or if you have a small group, I think it's usually best, if you can, to have one bird assigned to each youth. And you would use that Merlin Explore option to find your likely birds to assign to youth. And then they would create a drawing, write some field marks, write some facts about that bird, and then become the bird ID expert on that one bird. And what's cool about this is when you have completed these, and say you have a group of 10 youth, you have 10 little experts on a bird species. So when you go out to do your practice participatory science walk, you have 10 birds that you know you can identify. So it really is a great way to build that skill and confidence in bird identification. From there, we start to really get into some cool content around birds. So we get into this idea of habitats and adaptations. One of the fun things we do is we do a habitat inventory of the habitat around your meeting location. So you're looking for those, 4 key components of a habitat: food, water, cover, and space. And you think about, what does our area have? What might it be missing? How might we help make up for what's missing? So a lot of times water will be missing. You could consider, if it's a community space where you could do this, adding a bird bath to help provide that water. So that's a fun way to start cueing into what are around you in terms of habitat. The next step is designing a bird. So we go through our idea of what adaptations are, and then you have one group of kids every kid designs a tricky habitat. So a harsh habitat. Here, the habitat is drawn in a gray color, and it's hot and dry, very sunny, few plants, poisonous snakes. And then you switch those drawings, and the next person gets to design a bird to survive in that setting. And it can be as fantastical as you want. Just the point is to start thinking about adaptations. So for example, you can see this bird drawing has feathers that shade the head to help deal with that hot sun. So let's just take a second and talk about adaptations. This is how we address them in the lessons. So adaptations are something that help an organism survive and or reproduce in their habitat. So these are things that help them thrive and live and be able to have young. And they can be either physical, structural, or behavioral. So a physical adaptation would be something that is this egret's long beak for fishing. Um, Structural would be something like loons having heavier bones to help them stay underwater, things like that. Behavioral would be, have you ever seen cranes dance? Like they dance to help solidify their pair bonding. So there's all sorts of different adaptations there. And then we can start to think about adaptations and how that reflects on habitat. So we have an image of a great blue heron here. And which habitat do you think it belongs to? The habitat on the left or the right? And what clues are making you think it belongs to one or the other? Feel free to share in the chat window. So I'm noticing when I look at this heron that it has a really long beak and it has really long legs. Oh, I like that idea. The right, because the coloration looks like it would blend in with the water better. Absolutely, that kind of like nice gray back. I love that thought. I'm also thinking that those long legs and that long beak would be great for wading in water and catching fish. And then you can sort of do the same thing with several other varieties of birds. So for example, this ruddy turnstone, we can see again these camouflage clues, right? Where it looks like it would blend in better with the habitat on the right. Another clue we could use here is these kind of medium length legs. So shorebirds tend to be medium length legs because that helps them walk in the surf. And turnstones, they've got their name because they like to turn stones over and find their food. But this is a really fun one to do with youth because often when they see a pigeon, they see it in the city. So this can be a fun way to think about what its original habitat might be. So which do you think? Original habitat, the left or the right? The cliff or the forest? It's kind of instinct to think, oh, maybe the right side, right? But the pigeons actually nest on cliff sides. So they actually evolved for these really sheer rock sides, which is really fantastic and makes a lot of sense for why they thrive so well in cities, right? Because we have created essentially artificial cliff sides where they can find their nesting locations. So yeah, that's a fun one to think about for pigeons. It's one of the reasons they're so well adapted to surviving and thriving in our city areas. So lesson 9 focuses in on local habitats and starts getting into using the eBird database. So starting to query the database to look at information that other birders have submitted as well. So we do a local habitat comparison as well as we do our first official eBird walk. So I chose just to give you an idea of what I mean by local habitat comparison. The idea in this lesson is that you as a group would come up with 2 or 3 habitats in your local area that are different. So I chose Stewart Park, which is at the tip of Cayuga Lake, as one of my habitats. I chose Sapsucker Woods, which is around where the Lab of Ornithology is, and it has forest, pond, and meadow habitats. And then I chose the East Hill Recreation Way, which is a walking path that goes along a neighborhood on one side and some fields on the other. So these are pretty different habitats. And then you can go into the eBird database and look up these locations and find the different birds that have been seen there. So I went in and I looked to see what was seen most recently in November in these locations. And you'll see that the types of birds that you're seeing is really well reflects the type of habitat. So if you remember, Stewart Park was at the tip of the lake. And you'll see that our first 18 species or the first 14 species are all some kind of duck, or a coot is kind of a rail, but it's all some kind of water bird. And then you get into the gulls. So those are all birds you would expect to see on the lake. And if we look at the same number of birds over here for Sapsucker Woods Road, Sapsucker Woods, we know that there's a pond there, and we can see there are some water birds, but there's a lot more forest birds. And then we can come over here to the East Hill Recway and a more open habitat, and we can actually see there's some more soaring birds here, like the turkey vulture, the raven. They are kind of soaring birds. And there's gulls as well, which we're not seeing in Sapsucker Woods. So you can sort of get an idea from this, one, what birds are around you and what habitats are around you, but also how those habitats affect or reflect the birds that you're going to see there, which is a great way to get at habitat as a clue for bird ID. Helps you figure out what birds you might expect to see where. Lesson 10 is where we kind of start to bring it all together. So we dig into the power of eBird, how eBird is used, how participatory science can help conservation, and then we start planning for an action project. So this is a mystery map. It's a model, an abundance model created using eBird data and remote sensed habitat data. So we use a supercomputer to generate these models, and they're really cool because you can observe them and make some cool inferences about a bird. So this represents one species. The darker color is they're more abundant. In this case, the dark purple means you'd see 4.2 birds if you went birding there at the optimal time of day. The lighter color means 0.04, so they'd be more sparse. So what are you noticing about this bird? Right now we're in July, August, September, October, November, December. What can we infer about this bird from watching its movements throughout the year? Summer, and we move north. It migrates, absolutely. This is a migratory bird. So I'll go ahead and reveal this species unless anybody wants to quick put a guess in the chat window. This is, oh, the picture didn't show up. This is a yellow warbler. So it's a small insect-eating bird. One of the cool things about birds is they're excellent at thermoregulation. So they're really good at regulating their body temperature as long as they have enough calories. So we often think of birds as migrating to escape the cold. They're not really escaping the cold so much as they're escaping the lack of resources that come with the cold. So they're migrating from an area of low resources to an area of high resources. And the yellow warbler, being an insectivorous bird, eats insects. Those aren't around during the winter, so they migrate. So you can start to see how all of this ties together, how habitat, how food preference all ties together into the bird's life cycle. And so this is some of the cool stuff that comes out of eBird data. And so this lesson gives youth an idea of where their data is going and the type of data products that are being created out of it. And what's cool to think about is, like, you'll notice most of the birds are all down in this little part of Central America. And one of these things this model allows us to do is identify areas of important conservation concern. So you might be able to support conservation efforts in those areas that you know are critical to these migratory species. So these models are really, really useful for scientists and conservationists. The other thing this lesson does is it gets into a recent study from 2019 that looked at the total number of birds across Canada and the United States, and found that since 1970, so in about the span of a human lifetime, we have lost 2.9 billion birds. So that's just total bird numbers. That can be a kind of staggering number. It's sort of difficult to wrap your mind around. So what that works out to is about 1 in 4 birds lost since 1970. And we're seeing similar losses in biomass in things like insects as well, which makes a lot of sense. Birds and insects are pretty tied together. But this is a big red flag to all of us that something is happening in our ecosystems where they're not able to support life as well as they used to. And we're seeing this across all different sorts of birds. So grassland birds and boreal birds are two of the hardest hit, but we see it across all kinds of birds. So for example, this evening grosbeak, we've lost 9 in 10 since 1970. So this is something that put up some alarm bells and people cared about. It got put into, a lot of, got national news pickup. It was in the New York Times. And out of this project came some really great information and some really great reasons to hope. So this can be pretty depressing, right? This idea that we've lost this many birds. And a lot of our youth are receiving some pretty depressing information about the environment and thinking that, maybe there's nothing I can do. And so what I like about this study is it also provides us with reason to hope. So in these 3 groups of birds, raptors or birds of prey, waterfowl, and woodpeckers, we've seen increases in numbers because we knew that there were problems with these birds and we made concerted conservation efforts to protect them. So for example, with raptors, we eliminated DDT. And because we did that, we've seen 15 million increase in these birds. So there's a lot of reason to hope that shows that when we know there is a problem and we choose to do something about it, we can be really effective. So I just think that this study is really important because it has that message of hope for our youth. And so in this lesson, we have youth review a little bit about the study, but more importantly, we have them dive into these 7 simple actions that you can take to help birds. You can see them broken down here. And I wanted to draw your attention particularly to this one, which is do citizen or participatory science. So this is one major important way that you can help birds because the data in that study that showed us we lost birds, part of it came from the Christmas bird count, which is the oldest participatory science project in North America. So when we reverse these trends and when we have helped these birds recover, it is going to be participatory science data like eBird that lets us know we've done it. So participating in these projects is a really great way to help us keep track of bird populations at scale. And so Lesson 10 kind of gives you this idea of ways that you can help birds and gives you some websites and resources associated with that study to look into, and then has you think about a project that you could do. And this last lesson is kind of a nebulous time frame. It's not really an hour long. It depends on how long it takes to implement a project. But the idea is that you would come up with a project together as a team and then take whatever time you need and your schedule allows to implement the project. And we have lots of suggestions built into the lessons that range from something that you could do in an afternoon to something that might take weeks to do. So you can find one, help guide your students to something that fits your time frame. And so, that's part of the project planning is letting them know what time frame you have to work with too. And then finally reflecting and celebrating their success on their project. So that is the curriculum, a rundown of the lesson guides as a whole. Does anybody have any questions?